Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are working on the part that everybody is always afraid of, and that's the wiring harness. The mechanical portion, most people can do. A lot of people are discouraged from doing the LS swap because they don't understand the wiring harness. They don't want to deal with a computer. They don't want to have to deal with fuel injection at all. They just want a easy engine with a carburetor. So most people go with the small block Chevy instead of the LS. But now that the information is out there on the wiring schematics, the pinouts, the programming, it's fairly easy to manage all of this if you break it down into simpler steps. So what we're going to do in this video is we are going to strip this harness down. We're going to de-loom everything. And we are going to remove all the additional circuits that are in this that we don't need. In later videos, we will have a video on wiring this up for use in a standalone situation because I don't have the factory fuse block, so we are going to have to wire this up to a new fuse block. We are going to add a few circuits to this because this is a truck harness and truck computer, and it didn't have cooling fans. I'm hoping that I can use this computer to operate the cooling fans without having to add a temperature sensor in the radiator. Hopefully the programming inside of this, I can just turn that on, put a wire in that connector, and operate them that way. So to de-loom this, there's a couple tools we're gonna need. I'll show those real quick, and then we'll come back and I'll show you what we're gonna do on this. First thing we're gonna need is the pinout or the connector wiring diagram. I found this one on LT1Swap.com. I'll put a link to this down below. This is for the 99 to 2002 truck computer. The other ones may be similar, but there may be a couple pins that are switched around, so make sure you have the right pinout for your application. 8 voltmeter will be handy just in case you're not sure if you have the right wire. You can identify it by ohming it out from the PCM connector to the component connector itself. Terminal kit, you may not need this, but I have a couple different versions of it just in case I do, to depin the PCM connector. A Sharpie for labeling stuff. One of the most important tools is the stitch ripper. You might need electrical tape to temporarily bundle stuff together during the disassembly process. You're going to want some masking tape to be able to label stuff. This tool right here is going to save us a bunch of time in taking this harness apart. This is actually a seam or a stitch ripper for sewing. So if your wife has a sewing kit, she might have one of these, but you might ask permission before you grab it because you do break them occasionally. They're fairly inexpensive. I got this one at the hobby store for like $5. They have cheaper ones that are smaller. I prefer this one because I got big hands. It has a bigger handle. This is going to make it really easy to take the wiring loom off and the electrical tape off of that harness. Now, I don't need the PCM connected to this harness to do this. I actually have to unplug this to depin the connectors. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this off now. It was sent to me this way from the junkyard. So it might also be helpful for you to lay this out in your engine bay before you take it all apart so you can tell what goes where. On most of the LS vehicles, especially in the truck and SUV platform, this connector here and the computer sits at the left front of the vehicle behind the headlight or on the radiator shroud. This connector goes to the big fuse block that's mounted on the driver's side fender. And these other connectors, I'm not sure, they normally plug in underneath that fuse block, but I don't know exactly what they go to without looking at the diagram. This plastic bracket here mounts to the top of the intake. This short pigtail here has the alternator connector, the evap purge solenoid connector, throttle position switch, idle air control. And then some of this harness will lay over the top of the intake, and then there's this other harness that goes down the side. This harness here, even though it comes off the left side, it plugs into the cylinder head temp sensor. It drops down the front of the engine, loops back around on the right-hand side of the engine. It plugs into the starter energize, or the solenoid for the starter, the crank sensor. This plug-in here, I'm not sure if that one was used or not, but there's a few other connectors down there. That's where that one goes. Where it goes over the top of the intake, there is a map sensor connector. This connector here wasn't plugged into anything. I'm not quite sure what that one goes to. And then there's a couple of harnesses that loop back towards the front, and these will be on the side of the intake. This is the injector harness. And this bulkhead here actually goes to the coil packs. So there is a breakout harness on the coil pack bracket. On this other branch where it drops down behind the intake, there's the oil pressure sending unit, the cam shaft position sensor, and another ground. And then this harness will actually drop down to the bell housing. You have a front O2 sensor. These are the two plugins for the transmission range switch or position sensor. These are normally glued in, or they have a sealant that makes them very hard to unplug. I have that covered in a previous video, so I'll link that down below. So then this big plug-in here is the plug-in for our transmission. This will actually go onto the side of the transmission. The wires go internal to control the solenoids. There is a speed sensor plug-in and then rear O2 sensor. Now we're deleting rear O2 sensor, so we're gonna have to strip all of this harness because we have to pull wires out from front to back. Right before the bracket that mounts on top of the intake is the driver's side, is the injector harness and the plug-in for the coil packs. So there's a lot of different grounds scattered throughout this harness. I don't know why they didn't put them all in one place, but maybe it was an interference issue or convenience issue. They didn't want the extra length of a ground. They wanted a short ground to eliminate noise in the circuit. This other harness here comes off of the top of the intake at the back. It actually comes back forward, I believe. And this harness comes all the way over to the right front to plug into the mass airflow sensor. This other harness drops down and goes to the other O2 sensors, front and rear. So this harness works fine in the truck application, but in a conversion application, we're actually going to be running a different intake manifold. This is not going to look good in there at all. So what I want to do is I want to get this all stripped down, delete all the components we don't need, which is rear O2 sensors, the evap stuff. There's going to be quite a few extra circuits in here that I won't need. And then we're going to have to kind of lay it out in the engine bay, get stuff positioned how we want it. And then some of these harnesses are going to have to be shortened up a lot. Some of them will have to be lengthened, possibly, because I'm not going to be running the mass airflow sensor to the driver's side of the car. That's where the battery's sitting. The battery bracket fits in that location. I don't want to have to relocate that. So I'm probably going to make the air intake cleaner and mass airflow sensor on the left side of the vehicle. So I don't need this long harness to come all this distance, because all of this stuff's going to be mounted right over there on the fender next to that. I could probably just come right off of here over to the mass airflow sensor. But the first thing we're going to do is start stripping this down. If you need to, you may want to label each individual component. Just use masking tape that I listed in the tools required and a Sharpie. You can start labeling stuff. These would be injectors for bank 2. These will be injectors for bank 1, coils for bank 1, coils for bank 2, map sensor. All of that stuff can be labeled. So the way that these stitch rippers work, there's a pointy end and a ball end, and then down in the bottom there is a sharp edge. What we're going to do is just find the seam of the split loom. We can stick the ball down in there. You don't want to use the pointy end much because it can catch down inside a wire and tear the wire, but the ball end will normally protect that. And once the ball is down in that groove of the split loom, you can just push it right up and it'll split the electrical tape. Now there's sometimes a short piece of tape that ties the split loom down to the harness itself. So you may have to just peel back one layer, and we'll just continue to do this through the whole harness, removing the split loom. And then once we remove the split loom, there's still going to be sections that are taped up like this. You can do the same thing, just stick that ball under that electrical tape, work your way up the harness, removing that tape until you get everything kind of bare. If you aren't quite sure, then I would just get the split loom off first so you can get stuff laid out, and then you can go back and remove the tape. Like the tape that's on this harness here, there's no other circuits in this harness, there's just one plug-in. So I don't need to remove all of that tape. I may remove the split loom just so I can tidy this up later. But for the most part, we just want to break out all of the individual circuits. So I'm gonna go ahead and start stripping all this down. So that took 45 minutes to an hour to strip all of the loom off, cut all the electrical tape off where any circuits go together, because if there's a circuit all the way at the back end and I need to remove those wires, we need a free path to remove those circuits from this entire harness. So this is a little scary for some, but I labeled a few things just so I could make sure they get in the right locations. Everything else will kind of fall into its natural position once I get stuff laid out. And now we can start deleting stuff from the PCM connectors, depinning stuff, and then remove those entire circuits from this harness. A couple of the plugs that I couldn't remember from the first part, one went to the knock sensor, one went to the oil level position switch, or the float on the oil pan. I just couldn't remember where those were in the harness. So now we have two connectors for the PCM, a red and a blue. Depending on what kind of options you're running, you may be removing a lot more than I am. I'm running the factory 4L60E transmission. If you're running a manual transmission, or if you're running a Turbo 400 or a non-electronic shift transmission, then you can delete a lot more of this harness than I am. And then I'm gonna save all the stuff I remove because a couple of those pins I may insert into different locations to enable the cooling fan control. So the first thing we need to do is get the covers off of these. Before we do that, since these look very similar, and I believe the plugins might be interchangeable, I'm gonna label the connector blue and red. And then there's the covers here, the blue covers and the red covers we need to remove, and also the plastic cover on the back. And I don't think it matters on these, but I'm just gonna put a B and an R on the plastic covers as well, so I make sure that those go back on the right plug-in. And now I'll show you guys how to depin stuff. So on this back panel, there's a push tab in each of the four corners. You should be able to squeeze them, but sometimes there's a little bit of dirt and stuff in there, so a screwdriver can help. Just push those tabs in, lift up, kind of wiggle it around. There's another set in the middle and a set in the back. Now it may help to clean these harnesses up a little bit. Sometimes the wire might look like a different color, and if you're chasing wire colors instead of the pin numbers, they may mislead you, or it may look like the wrong one. And also the numbers are stamped in the back of here, so you may have to clean the dirt and dust off of that as well to be able to read that. And I'm just using a little bit of WD-40 to clean this up. It makes those wire colors very easy to see because it kind of shines it up, and you can use it for cleaning. On top of that, it may help these pins slide out of here a little bit once we go to remove them. To remove these caps, there is a slot in the top here, and there is just a plastic tab that holds it in place. So I'm just going to push on that plastic tab, and then you can lift this red shield off of there. And it is on both sides, on both connectors, so there's 4 on each plug-in. So now that those are off, we have all these pins here. All of the numbers are on the back side, so I'm going to flip this back over. Now, as you go through the list, if you're going off the link I provided down below, there is certain pins that don't apply to every vehicle. So as I go down this list, pin number 3 would be the secondary fuel pump control relay. There is no pin in that location. It goes 1, 2, 3. There's a whole bunch of blank spaces. That's for all optional equipment. Certain vehicles have different packages. if it's something that has a saddle tank that goes over the drive shaft, it may have 2 pumps, or if it has dual tanks. Pin number 7, I don't have as well. This vehicle was not equipped with EGR. Next one is 11, and I do have that one. So if you grab the pin from the wire from the back, and then just kind of wiggle it, you zoom you in here. As I wiggle that pin, you'll see it, or wiggle the wire, you'll see the pin start moving. So once that pin starts moving, and we may not have to use a terminal tool at all, with that cover removed, you can actually just reach your fingernail in there, lift up lightly on the plastic. Now I'm going to use the seam ripper just to show you guys what I'm doing. And you can use this as well if you're having a hard time grabbing that plastic thing. You don't want to bend that very far because you don't want to break the tabs in case you pull the wrong wire out. So I can just pull that tab back just a little bit, give the wire a tug. You may have to wiggle the connector slightly. It'll slide out the back of this unit. And that is the wire I just removed. So I'm going to go down the list and depin everything I don't need. On that link, everything that is yellow is emission control stuff that is not needed, or accessories like air conditioning. So since the old connector was sealed by having this wire in there, our options are to either cut the wire and then seal the end of the wire, because you don't want any water wicking through the wire. It would take a long time, but it is possible. Or they make a special rubber or plastic plug that can be inserted into the hole. Or you can simply just take a little dab of black silicone and squirt it into the back of the connector where this wire went in, and that will seal it up. If I can find the part numbers for the plugs, I will list those down below, but so far my searches have not been successful. So if you don't see it down in the description, then I did not find it. If you guys know where to get them, go ahead and put that in the comments so other people can benefit from that, and if I see it, then I'll add that to the description. So I'm going to go down the line here, remove the rest of the stuff that I don't need. Now that we have all the pins pulled out of the ECM connector, we can remove those wires from the harness. In some locations, there may be splice packs that we'll have to snip the wire out of, because some of these connectors may not ground to the ECM connector. They may ground to somewhere else in the harness. So I'm just going to start working these things out of there. This will take a little bit of time. Looks like quite a few of the wires went to this blue connector. In this case, the purge solenoid has a power supply wire that comes up here to the fuse block. I'm just going to snip that off. And then we can remove these one by one out of this harness. Now that we have all those circuits taken out of this harness, I don't have any more sitting up here. I think everything's gone all the way through. There's still a few more wires at this connector here. This is stuff that may have to be hooked up to different inputs, like the brake light switch, key on power, stuff like that. There's still a bunch of wires coming into here. A lot of these are going to be power wires. Some are going to be key on, some are going to be constant. So we're not going to worry about those. What I am going to do is I'm going to trim off these extras so we don't have to deal with those. Now I'm going to temporarily tidy up this harness just to make it a little easier to work with. So I'm just going to bundle it and put a couple of wraps of tape on it. This will make it a little more manageable when I go to put it in the vehicle. And even though this harness split into two pieces over the top of the factory intake, I can run this in one loom underneath the intake manifold. So I'm gonna temporarily tie this as one unit. I may have to pull a few circuits out as I go, but just to bundle it now, it's all getting into one bundle. And we can do some slight arrangement as we go. These are the driver side injectors and ignition coils. So I'll try to lay those out on that side. And even if they're not the correct length for what I need, it just helps to identify it if they're sort of where they need to go. And that there is a pretty good start to our wiring harness. We got everything stripped out. We got everything sort of laid out where it needs to go. I think we'll stop here today. I'll put links down in the description where I found the pinout and the which pins I need to remove. It was from LT1Swaps.com. Someone went through the effort of putting that together, and it saves everybody a bunch of time just to follow through that, because it tells you exactly what that wire goes to, if you need it, if you don't, if you're going without the transmission, the automatic transmission, what other connectors you can depin and remove. I think in the next video, we will set this down in the vehicle, get stuff routed a little more closely to where we need to go. We may have to shorten some harnesses up because they are very long, and I doubled up quite a bit of length. The harness itself will be smaller if we don't double wires back and forth. And then once we get everything laid out where we need to, I will go over how to loom this back up. I have a couple different looms I'm going to use. There's a few more things that aren't included in this wiring harness that we're going to need. We need a fuse block, some relays, some fuses. We're going to need a data link connector to be able to scan it and program it. And some people wire those up inside the vehicle. Some people leave them underneath the hood because they're not used very often. And then we're going to have to tie this into the factory wiring harness. I also don't have the battery in the vehicle yet, so I may have to get the battery tray, get the battery in there, run a power wire over to where the fuse block location will be, and then we can run our powers and all the stuff to the relay panel from there. Thanks for watching. If you want to see the rest of the build, go ahead and subscribe, click on that bell, and I'll see you guys next time.